Assalamu alaikum everyone. I welcome you all to the second session of the weekly webinar series as part of the Digital Education and Legal Awareness Program of the YU General Assembly Legal Forum. Today we will be analyzing Pakistan's compliance with the Financial Action Task Force recommendations. With me, I have Barrister Taimur Malik, who is a partner at Clyde & Co. and also is the patron of Youth General Assembly. Joining me today is also Ms. Noor Fatma, who is an associate at the Research Society of International Law and is a subject specialist when it comes to Financial Action Task Force recommendations and Pakistan's compliance with them. I welcome you both to this webinar series, and without further ado, I would like to start with Barrister Taimur. Sir, I would invite you to please introduce the topic generally for our audience and also to introduce what exactly is the Financial Action Task Force and what is this grey list all about?
Ji, thank you very much, Hania and the YGA team for inviting us today on this important topic. मैं थोड़ी सी जनरल बात करूंगा और I think the specifics can be discussed with Noor Fatma, who's been focusing on this particular subject for some time now. जो हम आजकल रशिया और यूक्रेन का क्राइसिस देख रहे हैं, उससे हमें एक चीज़ सीखने को मिल रही है कि अब खाली आर्म्ड वॉरफेयर भी जहाँ हो रही है, वहाँ पे भी लॉफेयर की बहुत मुदाखलत शामिल है और लॉफेयर कैन टेक डिफरेंट फॉर्म्स. पहले हम ये बात करते थे कि ममालिक जो हैं वो कुछ इंडिपेंडेंटली कुछ एक्शंस कर सकते हैं, सैंक्शंस लगा सकते हैं कुछ दूसरे ममालिक पे कि आप हमारे साथ ट्रेड नहीं कर सकते, आपके लोग हमारे पास वीज़ा लेके नहीं आ सकते, आपकी एयरलाइंस नहीं आ सकती. That would have been some form of lawfare and economic warfare against a particular country. In recent years, what we have seen is कि Financial Action Task Force जैसे international platforms जो हैं वो भी use किए गए हैं as a tool of lawfare against countries such as Pakistan. So Pakistan is now largely, if not almost fully compliant with FATF recommendations, but उसके बावजूद हम अभी तक अपने आप को ग्रे लिस्ट पे पा रहे हैं. अब हम देखेंगे कि जब से ये रशिया और यूक्रेन वाला मामला शुरू हुआ है तो हमें देखा है कि यूनाइटेड अरब एमिरेट्स को, यूएई को भी ग्रे लिस्ट पे डाल दिया गया है और उसकी हमें कोई खास वजह समझ नहीं आती कि जो ऐसे मामलात हों जो कि पहले 10 साल के मुकाबले में या पिछले चंद साल के मुकाबले में अब कोई चीज़ बहुत फंडामेंटली चेंज हो गई हो. सो सवाए इसके कि जो इंटरनेशनल जियोपॉलिटिकल पॉस्चरिंग है इन ममालिक की, वो शायद जो वर्ल्ड पावर्स हैं, जो इकोनॉमिक वेस्टर्न पावर्स हैं, उनको सूट नहीं करती. लेकिन जो हम रशिया के केस में जो मैं बात एक करना चाहूँगा, जो आज हम देख रहे हैं, जो कि इंटरेस्टिंग है कि ना सिर्फ ममालिक अपने जो लॉफेयर टूल्स हैं उनको यूज़ कर रहे हैं, ना सिर्फ वो मल्टीलैटरल इंटरनेशनल ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस को यूज़ कर रहे हैं, बट अब वो प्राइवेट कॉर्पोरेट एंटिटीज़ को भी और ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस को भी यूटिलाइज कर रहे हैं in the domain of lawfare. So रशिया के केस में हमने देखा है कि मास्टर कार्ड, वीज़ा हो, गूगल पे हो, ये सब चीज़ें बंद हो गई हैं. इवन जो आपके सोशल मीडिया डिजिटल कम्युनिकेशन के प्लेटफॉर्म्स हैं वो रिस्ट्रिक्टेड या बैन कर दिए गए हैं. सो उससे पता ये चलता है कि आइसोलेशन में आप बड़ी जल्दी जा सकते हैं. आपकी जो एक्चुअल नेशनल लेवल इंटर गवर्नमेंटल या इंस्टीट्यूशनल जो सैंक्शन हैं वो तो जब भी इन प्ले होंगी, लेकिन उनके डर से जो प्राइवेट ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस आपके कंट्रोल में हैं या आपके लॉज से जिन्होंने कंप्लाई करना है वो घबरा के पहले एक्शन लेना शुरू कर देंगे या आपके कहने पे कर देंगे शुरू. सो दिस इज एन इम्पॉर्टेंट थिंग टू हाईलाइट कि अनफॉर्चुनेटली जो ग्लोबलाइजेशन, द वे वी सॉ इट, द वे वी एस्पायर्ड फॉर इट, वो मुझे लगता है कि अब उस तरह नहीं रहेगी. Larger nation states will start looking inwards, developing their own platforms, चाहे वो पेमेंट प्लेटफॉर्म्स हों, सोशल मीडिया प्लेटफॉर्म्स हों, ये और चीज़ें हों. और एंड पाकिस्तान इज़ अ लार्ज country in all respects on the global forum. सो ये सब देखना होगा. अब ये सब चीज़ें जब सामने आती हैं तो आई थिंक हमें इंतज़ार नहीं करना चाहिए कि हमारे साथ कुछ हो. हमारे साथ FATF के सिनेरियो में तो हो रहा है, बट हम ये भी देखें कि दूसरी जो दुनिया में चीज़ें हो रही हैं हम उनसे क्या लेसन्स ड्रॉ कर सकते हैं और अकॉर्डिंगली अपना हम प्रीएम्प्टिव, प्रिवेंटिव फ्रॉम इकोनॉमिक, नेशनल सिक्योरिटी, हेल्थ सिक्योरिटी, ایون لیگل سیکورٹی ہم کیا اسٹیپس لے سکتے ہیں اور وہ ہمیں لینے چاہیے. جہاں تک FATF کی بات ہے, آئی تھنک UAE کا اگر ہم دیکھیں رسپانس ٹو دا FATF گرے لسٹنگ, اٹ شوڈ بی اے لیسن فار اس. انہوں نے اس کو بالکل ڈاؤن پلے کیا ہے. آپ کو انٹرنیشنل میڈیا میں یا ان کے ڈومیسٹک میڈیا کے اندر بھی کوئی زیادہ اس کے بارے میں بات چیت نظر نہیں آتی. یہاں پہ جتنے لوگوں سے UAE کے اندر میری بات ہوئی ہے, دے ہیو ڈاؤن پلیڈ اٹ ایون فرام این اکنامک اینڈ فائنینشیل اسٹینڈ پوائنٹ. اور سب کا اگین زیادہ تر کا یہ خیال ہے کہ جی یہ تو ایک جیو پولیٹیکل ٹول ہے جو کہ یوز کیا گیا, بٹ اٹ ڈزنٹ ریئلی چینج ہاؤ بزنس از ڈن ان دا کنٹری, کہ پہلے ہی لاز ایگزسٹ کرتے ہیں, ریگولیشن ایگزسٹ کرتی ہیں اور چیزیں ہو رہی ہیں. سو پاکستان کا آئی تھنک ہمیں اب تھوڑا سا اس رسپانس کو جو ہم آج تک لیتے آئے ہیں, جس کے بارے میں نور ول بی ٹیلنگ دا آڈینس کہ کیا اسٹیپس ہیں اور کیا ہماری کمپلائنس رہی ہے, ہم نے بہت کچھ کیا ہے. اینڈ کمپلائنس کمز ایٹ اے کاسٹ. وہ ضروری نہیں تھے کہ ہم نے کیے, اور بہت سارے ممالک جو کہ گرے لسٹ پہ نہیں ہیں بٹ ویسٹرن الائنڈ ہیں شاید, وہ ان کی کمپلائنس ہمارے قریب بھی نہیں آتی ہوگی. کمپلائنس کا مطلب یہ ہے کہ اگر انہوں نے ریکوائرمنٹ یہ ڈالی کہ جی سارے آپ کے اسٹاک بروکرز جو ہیں یا آپ کے بینکس جو ہیں وہ اتنی انہانس ڈیو ڈیلیجنس کریں انڈیویجولس کے اوپر, کارپوریشنس کے اوپر, NGOs کے ساتھ کام ہی نہ کریں, یا اور جو بھی انہوں نے چیزیں کی ہیں, اس سب کو کرنے کے لیے ٹائم درکار ہے. ٹائم کاسٹ منی. پھر اس ڈیٹا کو ہینڈل کرنے کے لیے ریسورسز چاہیے, رپورٹنگ کے لیے ریسورسز چاہیے. اس سے آن بورڈنگ کا, کلائنٹ اور کسٹمر آن بورڈنگ کا ٹائم زیادہ ہو جاتا ہے, کاسٹ انکریز کر جاتی ہے. سو ایز آف ڈوئنگ بزنس امپیکٹ ہوتی ہے, کاسٹ آف ڈوئنگ بزنس امپیکٹ ہوتی ہے. یہ سب امپیکٹ جو ہے یہ پاکستان نے اور پاکستانی معیشت نے پچھلے چند سال میں برداشت کیا ہے ان ٹرمز آف ٹرائنگ ٹو اچیو کمپلائنس ود FATF requirements. So I think we are reaching a point کہ جب ہم بھی تھوڑا سا یہ اپروچ لیں کہ جی ہم نے جو کرنا تھا ہم کر رہے ہیں, ابھی بھی مزید ہم کریں گے. ہم اپنے پاکستان کے نیشنل انٹرسٹ میں یہ سب کچھ کر رہے ہیں, ناٹ سمپلی ٹو adhere to somebody's idea of what should be Pakistan's compliance, because باقی ممالک کے ساتھ آپ اس طرح اسٹینڈرڈ کو اپلائی نہیں کر رہے. So I think we need to be a bit more confident in our approach. اور میری درخواست نہ صرف آپ لوگ جو آئی ہوپ کہ صرف لائرز نہیں دیکھے اور سن رہے ہوں گے ہمیں آج یا بعد میں اس کی ریکارڈنگ کو, دوسرے ڈسپلن سے بھی ہماری آڈینس دیکھ رہی ہوگی, تو آئی تھنک وی نیڈ ٹو گیٹ آؤٹ آف دس فیئر کہ جی FATF نے گرے لسٹنگ کر دی, اس کی یہ امپلیکیشنز ہیں. ہم اس چیز کو دیکھیں کہ ٹھیک ہے چیزیں تھیں, پاکستان نے اس سے بہت کچھ سیکھا. اس میں اپنے اداروں میں, پاکستان کی پرائیویٹ سیکٹر میں, فائنینشیل انسٹیٹیوشن میں, بینکنگ سیکٹر میں, ایون لا اینڈ آڈٹ فرمز کی ڈومین کے اندر, آپ کے ٹیلی کام آپریٹرز نے بہت سارے ڈفرینٹ سیکٹرز کے اندر اس کی کمپلائنس کے لیے کام کیا گیا ہے, اور بڑا کوہیسو کوہیرنٹ طریقے سے انٹر منسٹیریل لیول پہ کیا گیا. سو اس کا ہمیں ایز اے نیشن اسٹیٹ خود فائدہ ضرور ہے, اور ہمیں اس فائدے کو دیکھنا چاہیے. بٹ مزید آگے کیا ہے, اگر یہ ڈرامہ چلتا رہے گا اور ہم گرے لسٹ پہ مزید کچھ سال رہیں گے یا کچھ 6 مہینے رہیں گے, تو اس سے آئی تھنک وی نیڈ ٹو موو بیانڈ دیٹ. جس طرح وہ تھا نا کہ لیو ود کووڈ, اور ابھی ہو گیا ہے کہ کووڈ ہے یا نہیں ہے, تھنگز آر اوپننگ اپ, تو ہم اس کے ساتھ بھی آئی تھنک ویل ہیو ٹو لیو ود دس. جب ان کو سمجھ آ جائے گی کہ ہمیں پرواہ نہیں ہے اور ہم اپنی اچیو جتنی چیزیں کرنی تھی کمپلائنس وہ ہم نے میکسیمم کر لی ہے, تو اس کی افیکٹونیس ان دیئر آئیز بھی ختم ہو جائے گی یا کم ہو جائے گی, اور ہم گرے لسٹ سے بھی نکل آئیں گے. ادروائز آئی تھنک دس sword will keep hanging over our necks. So یہ چیزیں. باقی ویسے یہ بات نہیں ہے کہ FATF کی ریگولیشن اچھی نہیں ہے, ان کی جو جنرل ریکمنڈیشنز ہیں ٹیررسٹ فائنینسنگ ریلیٹڈ جو ریکمنڈیشنز ہیں اس کا ہمیں بھی فائدہ ہے. پاکستان ایز اے کنٹری ٹیررزم کا ون آف دا لارجسٹ وکٹمز ہیں ہم ایز اے نیشن. سو اس کو فائٹ کرنا, کمبیٹنگ آف ٹیررسٹ فائنینسنگ ہمارے اپنے انٹرسٹ کے اندر. سو ان چیزوں کے لیے تو ہم بالکل اچھی بات ہے, اگر کسی کے اشارہ دکھانے پہ ہمیں وہ کرنا پڑا ہے تو ہم نے کیا ہے اور ہم کر رہے ہیں, مزید کریں گے. بٹ آئی تھنک وی نیڈ ٹو چینج آور اپروچ, ہاؤ وی ویو دس, ہاؤ وی لک ایٹ دس پرابلم, اینڈ ہاؤ وی ٹیک اٹ فارورڈ. So with this, again, I'm grateful for being invited, and to Hania, you and the team for organizing this discussion on such an important topic. امید ہے لوگ اس ڈسکشن سے مستفید ہوں گے. نور, thank you for joining us today on a Saturday evening. I'll leave you and Hania and others to take this forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sir Taimur, for raising a very pertinent and different stance on this, that Pakistan actually has to move on. We've learned a lot. But again, the points that you've raised are very different analysis from what I got to know and what I researched upon. So thank you so much, sir, for bringing a different perspective, and thank you for your time. Moving on, welcome, Ms. Noor, and again, apologies for having you on a Saturday evening. But again, this topic is something that just came up a few days back, that Pakistan is still on the grey list. So just to start off the discussion, why did Pakistan in the first place come on this list? Because during my research, I again got to know that it's not the first time. Pakistan was on the grey list in 2008 and then in 2013. So what were the reasons, and what are the reasons still? Why are we on the grey list?
First of all, thank you so much for inviting me, and congratulations to you and the Youth General Assembly for hosting such sessions. I think it's important to build discourse amongst our youth and help them understand the importance of these sessions. Also, thank you to Sir Taimur Malik for all his insightful thoughts, and I really agree with most of pretty much everything that he has said. I'll just add in some more details. Moving on to your question, Hania, you are accurate. This isn't the first time that we have found ourselves on the grey list. However, this time the FATF had a renewed mandate, and they really identified some key areas, some key gaps in our legal frameworks. The way the FATF works is that all member jurisdictions are subject to mutual evaluations. And once Pakistan's turn came, they conducted a very holistic and a very comprehensive analysis of our money laundering and terrorism financing anti-terrorism financing frameworks, and they found a couple of key gaps. And what they did was they created perhaps the most ambitious and the most comprehensive action plan out of the gaps that were there in our legal system. So this isn't to say that we, as Mr. Malik also mentioned before me, everything that the FATF is doing, it's not that everything is wrong or everything should be, or that organization should be demonized. Because a couple of things that they have pointed out have resulted in a lot of benefits for Pakistan as well, especially in terms of technical components such as international cooperation or mutual legal assistance, which is, it's a technical term, but basically means gathering evidence from authorities that are based abroad for cases in Pakistan. We did not have enough frameworks for that. We did not have the laws and the rules that would facilitate such endeavors. So this grey listing in 2018 and the comprehensive progress that we made on this very, very ambitious action plan, 27 points initially, we reformed close to 17 laws, and we amended our key laws, our key Anti-Terrorism Act, our key Anti-Money Laundering Act multiple times. We introduced brand new laws as well. The Mutual Legal Assistance Act of 2020 is an example. We brought sectors into the regulatory sphere that were never subject to regulation perhaps before. And all of these things have built credibility. Most importantly, Pakistan's progress has always been acknowledged by the FATF. It has been heralded by the FATF. In every single plenary, we can see the tonality of the body statements towards us change. And even with this new action plan that was given to us later, a 7-point action plan, Pakistan registered tremendous progress within a very short framework of time, well before the deadlines that even the FATF gave to us. And the FATF really appreciated that in last week's plenary, it was pointed out. So I know I've kind of gone off on a tangent perhaps, but I kind of want to second what was said before me, that a lot of the things that the FATF made us do there were things that needed to be done. And Pakistan was not able to do it in a quick fashion, but also it revamped its entire frameworks. So that's it created a launch pad for us to do even better things from now. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, thank you, Noor, for your response. It was indeed very comprehensive. and highlighted a few of the very pertinent points that I think our audience would find very beneficial, especially when it comes to knowing what exactly is this grey list and why was Pakistan on the grey list. Now, moving on, you also mentioned that FATF gave us a very ambitious action plan that had some 27 points. So, what were these 27 points? There were some requests made for upgradation of laws, some legal amendments had to be made, and we eventually did. But just to give an overview, what was this 27-point action plan about?
So that can take up the most of the session, but I'll try to be as concise as possible. The initial 27-point action plan mainly revolved around terrorism financing. So how to stop terrorism financing, how to mitigate the risks that come from terrorism financing. And what was asked of us in that action plan revolved around our authorities introducing new rules, new regulations, creating new laws. For example, the State Bank was instructed to issue new rules and regulations for all the banks and financial institutions. If you're dealing with, say, a person who might have a risky profile, then conduct enhanced due diligence, as was said before me. That is just one example. Our state authorities were instructed to conduct risk-based assessments. Our as I mentioned, mutual legal assistance just beforehand. We did not have frameworks for that, so that was pointed out. Our authorities were also instructed to improve coordination and communication amongst themselves. And the final point, which is still outstanding, I really don't want to call it an outstanding area because we have registered progress on that front, is basically show and demonstrate that you have increased terrorism financing conviction so that your justice sector frameworks are working to convict people on terrorism financing cases. And that is something that Pakistan has continued to exhibit, will further continue to exhibit this in the future. This is the only point that is left now, which the FATF says that we need to register a bit more progress on. But as it stands, it's not easy to conclude a case in a short period of time. It has to follow due process and due procedure. So this last point, it is imaginable that it will take a little bit more time before we're able to fully register progress on that. But we have come a long way. This was the initial plan that was given to us in 2018. Last year, in 2021, in June, the FATF gave us a separate plan. This was a new 7-point plan focused on money laundering concerns. And here, again, they keyed in and honed in on some areas that have been historically a little bit troublesome for Pakistan. The key focus here was on DNFBPs, which is a technical term, designated non-financial businesses and persons, which included lawyers, jewelers, realtors, and accountants. And the FATF asked us to bring all these professionals and all these businesses into the realm of regulation, which is quite an uphill task. However, even on this front, within less than a year, Pakistan has been able to achieve 6 out of the 7 points. So as of now, we had 34 total points on our action plans, out of which Pakistan has fully achieved 32, and only 2 are outstanding. And both the points that are outstanding revolve around the same element of demonstration that you are continuing to convict people in MLNTF cases. And as I mentioned before, these are things that will take some time. Yeah. Over to you, Hania.
We actually apologize for this. Ms. Noor, there seemed to be an internet problem at our end, so we just lost connection. Thank you so much for your response. Actually, moving on, the problem is that there's some issues with this live session as well, and the internet connection is not very stable. So apologies for that. So
No.
moving on, you highlighted that we have actually made significant progress, and there has been compliance with more than I think that we could actually attain, have complied with it, but it's just that one point which pertains to convictions that we're actually lagging behind, and it requires time. So till then, we will be on the grey list. We'll continue to be on the grey list as FATF decided to do. And what are the possible implications of being on the grey list? How many of them have actually manifested? And the negative implications we're actually talking about, the reason why we fear being on the grey list.
Sorry, so you broke off a little bit. Is your question, what are the negative implications of being on the grey list?
Yes, yes.
All right. That's a very good question. And the negative implications of being on the grey list are primarily economic and reputation-wise. Internationally, being on the grey list means that basically it means that Pakistan is a risk for business. When it comes to business or when it comes to economic transactions, Pakistan is a risky jurisdiction compared to other jurisdictions. That means a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of red tapeism, a lot of high costs. For example, if an investor wants to invest in Pakistan, they would be required to go through extra hurdles. They would be required to fill in extra paperwork. They might face a lot of delays, and for an investor who is spending money and all of this is costing him in dollars, he might or she might think that they could take their investment to another low risk jurisdictions where the costs would be lower. So there was a study published, I believe, in 2020 that estimated that being on the grey list has cost Pakistan up to perhaps $38 billion in lost contracts, in lost investments, and because of the increased cost of doing business. It also means that banks and financial institutions, for example, when they are arranging transactions or receiving transactions, they also spend a lot of time conducting due diligence and enhanced due diligence, which is also something that could reduce remittances perhaps and have an impact on those. So the implications are economically, I've explained that, and reputationally, of course, when you have a reputation of being a country that has high terrorism financing risks or high money laundering risks, nobody would want to take your money there, and you're increasingly seen as a country that might not be fulfilling its international obligations the way it should be. You might be seen as a country that is somehow posing a threat to the integrity of the international financial system. So these reputation risks are also involved. And I think these are primarily the negative implications of being on the grey list.
Indeed, they're very economic as well. We have like reputational issues, as you've mentioned. But does FATF require 100% compliance before we could actually be off the grey list? And what should be the expectation of the nation from the June meeting of the FATF? Is there any hope that we'll be getting off?
So that is what we have been told by the FATF in various press conferences as well, that unless Pakistan receives 100% compliance on all action plan points. So we are at 32 out of 34, which is a great number. But again, the last 2 points are something that could take a long time or maybe a little bit more time. I remember reading in a Pakistani newspaper, that the authorities were maybe aiming for completion by early next year. But even in June 2022, it would be interesting to see if perhaps we can achieve progress on one of the outstanding points, and how that goes on that front. I would also like to mention something very interesting here. It's not just the action plan points that Pakistan has to fulfill, it's also technical compliance points. And technical compliance is one of the key things that are part of the mutual evaluations, as I mentioned before. And Pakistan has completed fully achieved almost full compliance on 35 out of 40 technical compliance matters as well, compliance recommendations, which is a huge, huge achievement for the country in a very short span of time. So all these factors are something that go in favor of Pakistan and add to our reputation and show our commitment. They demonstrate our commitment in fulfilling our international obligations. So that's important to note as well.
Indeed. So you mentioned the term technical compliance. I also came across this term effective compliance. So what exactly are these two terms about? And especially when it comes to analyzing our compliance with the FATF recommendations, these two terms are frequently used. So could you just elaborate what these two are?
Sure, I'll try to keep them as simple as possible. Technical compliance basically means, are the laws and rules in your country, are they enough to counter the risks that are posed when it comes to terrorism financing and money laundering? Basically, technical compliance means, technically, are your laws and rules enough? Effective compliance, on the other hand, looks at, are these laws and regulations producing results or not? So you can have all the laws in place and you can be technically compliant, but they might not be producing results. So that would mean those laws aren't effective enough. We don't have the data for effective compliance as yet for Pakistan, but we do know that we have scored very high on our technical compliance as well. We have registered a lot of improvements in our law, and we've registered that has translated down into our rules and regulations. As I mentioned, 17 laws were amended, new acts were introduced, more than 36 new regulations were created under these new 17 laws to kind of make sure that these systems are effective and producing results. So I hope that the difference was clear between the two. It is quite confusing, so let me know if you need more help on that.
You've explained that quite well, but just a little follow-up question.
I
A lot of
apologize.
No worries. We just have a little more concern, especially about effective compliance. You mentioned that how we do not have a lot of data exactly on effective compliance. Does FATF actually require that data, or is it technical compliance that FATF is looking for?
The FATF looks for both of them. By me saying that we don't have enough data, I mean that it's not publicly available. So the FATF also regularly publishes follow-up reports that clearly tell us how Pakistan has achieved its progress on technical compliance. Those reports for effective compliance are, I believe, not available publicly. Governmental authorities deal with that on their own. So, but for the FATF, achieving progress on both of them is important. And that's also reflected in the action plan points too.
Thank you for that clarification. So, moving on, you just mentioned how Pakistan has amended or either promulgated around 17 new laws. There are a number of regulations that have also been passed. And still, just on the basis of 1-2 points, we're still on the grey list. Now, this question might not be a strictly legal question, more to do with like the current affairs approach on it. A lot of people have actually come up with this view, and they try to propagate it in society as well. That, and basically Temur also made a slight reference to it, how FATF is actually being used as a tool to achieve certain geopolitical objectives or to bring some sort of subordination from any country. This is the general narrative that goes around in society, that, you know, maybe we denied America some certain air bases for some reason. I just came across this person who was talking about it, and that's the reason why we're on the FATF grey list. Would you agree with this, that FATF is actually used as a political tool to propagate and put forward certain narratives?
Thank you for asking that question. And I kind of have a more neutral stance on this particular question, because at the same time, I want to say that I do understand why people would feel that FATF is a politicized tool. If I talk about it from an international relations perspective, we see that international institutions can come up with their own rules and regulations, and countries are eventually they're required to follow those rules and regulations. So the FATF came up, it's a technical body, it's a technical watchdog. it came up with its own criteria, and we are kind of in the crosshairs because uh, we did have some issues that needed to be worked on, and we have achieved progress. So, and that is the kind of progress that the FATF itself, as I mentioned, acknowledges in its follow-up reports. So, technically, you have to realize that these, even if the FATF was a political tool, it is still a technical body, and it retains that technical outlook in everything that it does. What is happening, I would still say that it's interesting to note that in this plenary, the FATF had a statement on Russia and the Ukraine situation, which I particularly found very fascinating because Russia is a key member state of the FATF plenary and has voting rights. But the FATF, in this statement, they came out against Russia, and they called Russia's actions a gross violation of the FATF mandate. And they said that they will be reviewing the role of the Russian Federation within the FATF body, which I thought was very fascinating to see because this is where you see geopolitics really shining through even international institutions, no matter how technical or no matter how neoliberal they are. So I'm kind of neutral on that stance. I do see the need to technically improve our laws, and justice sector actors, this is something that people who are on the front lines, investigators, prosecutors, judges, they will tell you that they have benefited so much from the enhanced regulations and the enhanced legal framework that we now have. The people who work with the laws will say that these laws have been beneficial to Pakistan. However, at the same time, we do see that the FATF's role is maybe not as neutral as we thought it was, given that it can go even against its own member states and take sides if it needs to. So, of course, all those concerns are valid.
Yeah, that pretty much addresses all the concerns a man might also have when we get to know that Pakistan is still on the grey list. Moving on, I actually have a question that was supposed to come towards the very beginning in the chronological order. The fact that you've just raised this, there are around 38 to 39 countries who are actually part of the Financial Action Task Force, and not the entire world, all the countries are actually part of it. So why and when did Pakistan become part of the Financial Action Task Force?
So that's a great question. Pakistan is not a part of the Financial Action Task Force. Pakistan is a member of the Asia Pacific Group, which is a small affiliate body that participates within FATF. And the FATF, when I say the FATF, I mean the 39 countries that are the decision makers that have voting rights and are the ones making decisions in plenaries. But the rules and regulations created by FATF are not just limited to those 39 countries. They extend to all the jurisdictions of the world. That's the kind of body that the FATF is, and that's the kind of power that they wield as well. So even though Pakistan is not directly a member of the FATF, it cannot participate in plenaries, it cannot make its voice heard directly in plenary sessions. It has to do that through the Asia Pacific Group. The thing is, whatever the FATF decides applies to us. Whatever the FATF decides applies to Bangladesh as well, which is also a country that is not part of the FATF Secretariat, and so many other countries of the world. There are more than 200 jurisdictions to which the FATF technical standards are applicable upon. So my view has always been that Pakistan needs to understand how these international institutions work, and by completing our action plans, my personal opinion is that Pakistan can become a FATF success story. And when it becomes a FATF success story, that could pave its way towards actually becoming a member of the FATF body itself, with voting rights and with accountability on such.
Oh, I mean, there's a huge misconception I had, and I'm sure a lot of other people also have, that you have to become part of FATF to actually be subject to this regulatory procedure. But thank you for that clarification. It is indeed very it is very intellectually stimulating in the sense that we didn't know what exactly this body is and how do you become members of that. Moving on, you mentioned how any and every jurisdiction is open to these FATF recommendations, these FATF regulations. So what has been the international cross-jurisdictional approach of FATF been? We just know that UAE was placed in the grey list as well. What about other jurisdictions? And just a brief overview of their compliance with FATF recommendations.
So there are, I think, around 15 countries that are on the FATF grey list as of now. I believe Turkey was grey listed in the previous plenary, which was last year in October 2021. So that kind of gave further rise to concerns that the FATF might be politically motivated. It's coming after all the Muslim countries, so to speak. A lot of people take that view. But as of now, a lot of different jurisdictions are on the grey list. I know Panama is on the grey list. Some African countries are on the grey list as well. Myanmar was on the grey list, and I think it still is. Also, with every plenary, the FATF also takes countries off the grey list. So in this plenary that was concluded in March, Zimbabwe was able to come off the grey list. In the previous last year's plenary, I think Mauritius and Botswana were able to get off the grey list as well. So it's a cyclical thing, and we are hyper focused on Pakistan, of course, because we are Pakistanis, but many countries of the world have to go through this process. And as I mentioned before, the mutual evaluation system is such that every country, every jurisdiction of these 200 jurisdictions of the world is subject to the FATF review. So it's just a matter of scheduling and when their turn comes, but every country will have to go through this thorough assessment of their regulations and systems.
Okay, so with that, we move to the final question for this session. And I think I would take this from some remarks that Barrister Temur also gave towards the beginning of the session. I saw you nodding as well. So he gave the instance of how UAE was actually able to downplay this entire grey listing that was done by the FATF. And okay, so my question is that how can we actually take inspiration from that step that UAE did, and how beneficial will that be for us?
That was a very good point from Mr. Malik, and I fully agree with him, because I've also been doing some research into this and reading articles, and the view is that they do not take it seriously. But also we have to kind of understand the UAE situation. So, for example, Pakistan is a country that needs to further expand its economy. It is battling one economic crisis after the other. It is struggling to become the kind of Asian tiger that it once hoped that it would be. You cannot compare the strength of Pakistan's economy to the UAE's economy, which is again very much rooted in petrodollars, and they have that to fall back upon. Pakistan also is reliant on international lending institutions. We need loans from the IMF and we need loans from the World Bank. However, when we apply for those loans, we are subject to even more stringent conditions, even more harsher conditions, just because we are on the FATF grey list and we are seen as a higher risk jurisdiction because of that. The UAE does not need that much loans. It does not need to go out there. It does not share that kind of country profile that Pakistan does. So that is why they have been able to, and very successfully at that, I would say, they've been able to downplay their grey listing, because in reality it actually might not affect them that much. But it does, and it has affected Pakistan a lot. But moving to your second question, how can Pakistan learn from this or move forward from this? I would again iterate what I said earlier. Pakistan should see itself as a FATF success story. Even if you take that view that this institution was against us, we took everything that was given to us and we hit a six. We kicked the ball out of the park. We did everything that we were supposed to do within a very short period of time, and we have done wonders. We have achieved so much in these past 4 years since our grey listing. The progress has been remarkable, and justice sector actors who are at the forefront of this testify that the new frameworks and the new laws they were needed, and they're helping Pakistan. They're helping Pakistan defeat terrorism on its own home soil. So I think just need to change the optics around that. And I really hope that in the future, diplomatically, Pakistan can use this as a launching pad, as a booster when it comes to the front in international forums, and it uses this as a success story. Okay, look, we were given the most. We were a country that had to face terrorism in the worst way possible. And we were given an extremely tough action plan by the FATF. But we are a responsible country. We're fully committed to our international obligations. We did everything that was asked of us. We did it as quickly as it can be done. And now we are at the forefront of perhaps leading reforms at the FATF or leading reforms at international institutions. So that kind of diplomatic posturing, I feel, and that kind of narrative building, that posturing ourselves and seeing ourselves instead of being demoralized by being on the gray list. I don't think Pakistan needs to be demoralized anymore, because the points that are outstanding, we will definitely achieve progress on them. It's just a matter of time. Convictions take time. If seeing a case from start to finish takes time, we have to follow due process as well. So I believe these should be the next steps forward.
Great. Thank you so much for your response. With that, I would like to move towards the end of the session. But before that, I just have one little thing that's not exactly a question. But you have authored a report on FATF recommendations compliance by Pakistan. So could you just elaborate a bit for our audience? What exactly is this report, and is it publicly available if any of our audience actually wants to read it, or just generally give like an overview of the report that you worked upon?
Of course. So RSIL has kind of taken the lead in analyzing from a technical perspective, the laws and new rules and regulations that have been introduced. And the report that you are referring to is a completely independent assessment of Pakistan's technical compliance. It's kind of the stuff that the FATF does, but we've done it here in Pakistan, and we have looked at the letter of the law. We have looked at the new laws, we have looked at the new regulations, and we have a very objective element in our reports, in that we compared our progress to countries that either shared our risk profile or were able to get off the grey list earlier. So Sri Lanka was once grey listed. So we kind of saw what was our progress under, say, recommendation 5. And we compared that to the laws that were passed in Sri Lanka. And then we were able to conclude that on the basis of this, Pakistan should be rated upwards. And I have to mention here that once we published our report, I think the FATF's own follow-up report came maybe a month later, and it mirrored the ratings that RSIL had given in our report. So that is how objective our assessment was on that. The report is publicly available on our website for anyone who wants to view them or download them or use them. We also published regular plenary updates. I think one will be coming out on Monday, which will analyze what happened in the February-March plenary and what are the next steps for Pakistan as well. So those resources are publicly available on the RSIL website, and anybody can review them.
Thank you so much, Ms. Noor, for your time. This session has been an eye-opener for me, honestly. There was so much to learn from, and I hope this will be so beneficial for all the audience who will be seeing this video, who was seeing this session, and will eventually see it once we post a recording. The takeaway from the session would be that Pakistan has indeed made significant progress, as was highlighted by Ms. Noor throughout the session, and it's time that we change certain optics, and indeed the future is bright for Pakistan. She has effectively highlighted how it's a matter of time and we'll eventually be off the grey list, inshallah. Thank you so much, Ms. Noor, for your time, and this brings us towards the end of the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you.